What's up, folks? We are here, episode 2 of Garage Training here at Frazier's Bar and Grill. And today, I wanted to talk about compression, boom, and expansion, voila, in regards to human movement. And again, like I mentioned in the last videos, I like to kind of view things on a spectrum. And when explaining things, it's kind of easiest to explain them on one end of the spectrum, so you kind of really get the idea of what somebody may be talking about. So I want to use the example of a really heavy back squat to kind of bring this model together of compression and expansion and a kind of airflow and kind of pressure dynamics in regards to human movement. So episode 1, I talked about respiratory mechanics in the gut. So basically when you breathe in, rib cage and thorax expands, guts get pushed down by the diaphragm, and the pelvic diaphragm is there to catch it. And now I'm going to kind of take that a step further in how we use compression and expansion strategies to move, to lift heavy weight, whatever it may be in the weight room or even out on the field if we're playing sports. Real quick, I'm going to just tilt this up. Boom. Hopefully that's good. So, if you spend any time around strength sports or compete in strength sports yourself, everyone kind of knows, understands the idea of when you lift heavy, and we're going to use the back squat example today. What you do, you take a big breath in, hold, stay tight, and you just hold that breath all the way down, and then you kind of push as hard as you can to stand back up. Now, it's kind of really interesting to me how kind of powerlifting coaches have really gotten this right when it comes to really trying to lift as much weight as possible on the bar, specifically in the example of a back squat. I don't think most powerlifting coaches are thinking about airflow and compression and expansion in the back squat. I think they're just thinking about taking a deep breath in, squeezing and staying as tight as possible the entire rep. And I think powerlifting coaches have been coaching like this for a while, and no one really talks about kind of what's happening internally and why this is such an effective strategy to lift as much weight on the bar as possible. So I'm going to kind of break things down and explain what exactly is going on here, because I find it super, super interesting. So when a power lifter or anybody goes to take a big back squat attempt, again, like I just said, they take a big breath in here, hold, and they're told to stay tight, and they want to hold that air in all the way down and up. So going off of kind of the last video, when you take a deep breath in, when you inhale, chest, ribcage, thorax expands, guts get pushed down to the pelvic diaphragm. So when you take a deep breath in, top of the thorax expands, lungs expand, creates a lot of pressure up top, the guts get pushed down, the abs compress, they're essentially making sure the guts are safe and don't move much. The abs compress around the guts get pushed down to the pelvic diaphragm, and most strong people that lift a lot of weight have a concentrically oriented pelvic diaphragm that's there to essentially catch the guts and kind of squeeze them back up. So basically, when you take that deep breath in and hold it, you're kind of squeezing and tightening everything up from pelvis to shoulders, essentially. And like I said, powerlifting coaches have got this right away when they say take a deep breath in and hold it and stay tight. Now, like I said, up top is expansion when you breathe in. Down here, the abs compress. And when you exhale, the opposite happens. So the abs kind of expand, and then the thorax kind of compresses because the lungs compress, and it lets the guts kind of get pushed back up. And so I want to use the back squat example. Ooh, no, there's water. When we have a hose. So this is essentially what's happening. So we all know, imagine this is connected to a hose outlet. Boom, we squeeze that, and we know that stops any water flow if I make a kink in it like that. When we were kids, we always mess around with this. because we kind of trick people, oh, the water's not coming out now because I have this in it. So when you're lifting a super heavy back squat, you take that big breath in and hold it, and what you're doing is the entire time, you just inhaled, but the entire time you're actually, through that entire rep, through that entire back squat max, you are actually trying to exhale as hard as you can. So you're essentially filling this up and compressing all that air you just took in. I'm trying to compress, squeeze, and I'm trying to compress down here. So I'm basically from here to here, I'm just squeezing the little light years. I don't even think that makes sense, but I'm squeezing so damn hard to create as much pressure as I can to push down from my pelvis into the floor and up into the bar. So I'm squeezing from here to here. I'm squeezing all that air and all that fluid in the guts so hard to create compression and push down through my legs and compression to push up into the bar. And so imagine somebody accidentally didn't stop doing this. Most people that are relatively well trained do this on purpose or do it kind of intuitively because it's going to help them lift the most weight as possible. So I don't think anyone's going to purposely do this, but for an example, say someone accidentally, so like I said, you're trying to exhale, because exhalation is compression, inhalation is expansion. So they're trying to exhale, and they're actually closing up here to not let any of that air or pressure out. Because if they did actually get that air out, they just lost all that pressure that was built up here. So again, if somebody in a back squat, let's just start again, big inhale in, is compressing everything as hard as they can to create as much pressure as they can, and for some reason on the way up, they went and let everything out. They're going to, this squeeze that they just got, that's going to expand, and they're letting all that pressure out. In the hose example, all that water spraying out of the hose, and you have no more pressure built up here. So in a back squat, if somebody did that, I am willing to bet if they were at 85% plus of their max, or maybe even 90% plus, and they're just trying to lift it one time, and as soon as they got to the bottom, exhaled all the air out as much as they could, they are not standing back up with that weight because they just lost all that pressure that they squeezed and tried to create. And you can, we know this so intuitively, but we never think about it from these internal mechanics. And I think we've all seen the videos or pictures of a power lifter trying to lift, or they're just out on the platform trying to lift as much weight as possible, and because they're squeezing everything and they're holding all that pressure in, because if they let it out, they're untightening, they're losing that pressure, and they're not going to stand up with the weight. And you can see it, their eyeballs look like they're about to pop out of their skull. They get those crazy veins up in their forehead, and it literally looks like you're trying to squeeze all the air out of a balloon, or all the water out of a hose that has a kink in it, but you're essentially squeezing for dear life to not let anything out. And I think sometimes we because it's so hard to keep all that internal pressure, we do accidentally let some of it out sometimes. Because you hear this all the time when people are lifting heavy. They're like, and then they're letting a little bit of that pressure out just because they simply can't hold it in anymore. So this is the strategy people use to lift really heavy weight on the bar. It's super compressive on the inside. They're just compressing and squeezing everything to create as much pressure down from the pelvis to the floor, through the legs, and from the pelvis up through the chest and shoulders up into the bar. They're essentially compressing and squeezing, creating as much pressure as possible to boom, lift that weight. That's one side of the spectrum when it comes to highly compressive strategy to lift heavy weight. And going along with that, they have to get that big breath in because they're just trying to find more things to squeeze. Now, if a power lifter was here and then stopped there and then went down and up, I guarantee they're not as strong on that lift either. They have to go and expand enough to get more air in just so they have more stuff to squeeze so they can create more pressure. That's one end of the spectrum, super compressive strategy. You're not creating much movement there. If you did, like I said, as soon as you actually let some of that air out when they're trying to exhale but not actually letting it out, if they let some of that air out, boom, they created movement with that, and then less pressure equals more movement. So boom, they're not standing that weight up. The other end of the spectrum is probably like kind of warm up corrective exercises where you're not trying to compress at all. You're trying to expand, expand, expand to create movement in certain places that people otherwise might not have. So that's very inhalation based. Inhalation is expansion, exhalation is compression, and powerlifters, they exhale. They're trying to exhale because they're trying to compress as hard as they can, but they don't want to actually let any of that air out because then they've actually just lost that pressure. So one end of the spectrum, like I just mentioned, the back squat, super compressive, exhalation strategy, trying to create as much pressure as possible, where this end of the spectrum is inhalation based, expansion based, not very compressive, not high pressure, because you're trying to create as much movement as possible. If you think about the easiest example, because this is how I learned it, is the inflatable tube guys at the car dealerships. All that airflow, when it fills up, boom, you got all that movement. That's kind of this end of the expansion. Super expansive, inhalation based equals not much pressure, but you have more likely to have access to ranges of motion that somebody down here doesn't. So boom, that's what I got for today. I find this so interesting because like it's something strength athletes have known all along, but we haven't really ever thought about it from kind of this model and perspective. So hope you enjoyed. This was episode 2. Stay tuned. I'm gonna create a lot more of these. It's fun. Just started training in my garage, so you'll get some training footage as well. Until next time, folks.